Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something that might sound super simple on the surface, but trust me, it can actually get pretty complicated. We're talking about getting those MP3s that you might have stashed away onto your iPhone.
Yeah, a lot of people might think, oh, that's easy, but it can get a little tricky.
Right. You might be thinking, I've got this massive MP3 collection from way back when, or maybe you just want to know, how does this whole process even work? So to get the full picture, we're diving into a mix of how-to articles, some discussions from user forums, and even a YouTube tutorial.
A YouTube tutorial, those are always helpful.
Oh yeah, always good for a visual, right?
For sure.
So by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only know how to get those MP3s onto your iPhone, but you'll also, and this is important, understand the WHY behind the different methods, the pros and cons of each, and some expert tips to make the whole process as smooth as possible.
Yeah, because there are actually quite a few different ways to do this, and they each have their own kind of quirks and things you got to watch out for.
Exactly. So let's start with what's probably the most obvious method, especially if you're already in the Apple ecosystem. The iTunes Apple Music route. The YouTube video we found makes it look ridiculously easy, just like drag and drop, boom, you're done.
Well, yeah, the drag and drop part is definitely true, but the video kind of skips over a really important step, tagging.
Oh yeah, they mentioned tagging in the video, but it kind of seemed like it was just about keeping your music library organized, making sure everything has the right artist, album, that kind of stuff, which, don't get me wrong, is important, but is there more to it than that?
There is. Way more. See, tagging is how Apple Music actually makes sense of your music.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not just for you. It's like the instructions for Apple Music. Without proper tagging, your library could be a total mess. Apple Music might not even be able to sort your songs correctly.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about aesthetics, it's about functionality. So you're saying that even if I know what song is what, Apple Music might get totally confused.
Exactly. So before you even think about transferring those MP3s, take some time to make sure they're tagged correctly. Artist, album genre, even album art. It all matters.
Okay, good to know. So let's say all my MP3s are perfectly tagged and ready to go. The video then shows them plugging in the iPhone and doing the whole syncing thing through the music settings, and that's when the magic happens, right?
Yeah, but there are a couple things to keep in mind here. First, this is all assuming that you already have iTunes or the Apple Music app installed on your computer. Not everyone does.
That's a good point. Okay, so what if you don't have iTunes?
We'll get to that in a bit. But first, another thing about syncing is that it's not exactly instantaneous. It can actually take a while, especially if you have a massive music library. We're talking like hundreds of gigs.
So patience is key. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
But while we're on the topic of syncing, one of the articles mentioned something called iCloud Music Library. How does that fit into all of this?
Okay, so iCloud Music Library is basically like your personal music cloud. It keeps all your music in sync across all your Apple devices. So once you've got those meticulously tagged MP3s in your library, iCloud Music Library makes sure they're accessible from your iPhone, your iPad, your Mac, even your Apple TV.
Wow, so it's like you have your music with you wherever you go as long as you've got an internet connection.
Exactly. It's super convenient, especially if you switch between devices a lot.
That's awesome. But what if you don't have a subscription to Apple Music? Are you just out of luck? Can you still get those MP3s onto your iPhone? There's got to be another way, right?
Absolutely. There are definitely people out there who prefer to own their music rather than relying on a streaming service, and that's where direct transfer via iTunes or Finder comes in.
Oh, interesting. So this is totally bypassing Apple Music altogether.
Exactly. And one of the how-to articles we have breaks down this method step by step.
So it's like going old school, taking matters into your own hands.
Kind of, yeah. And the beauty of it is you don't need an Apple Music subscription for this method. It's all about putting the music directly onto your iPhone's storage.
So I'm guessing this involves cables and stuff?
Yeah, you're going to need to connect your iPhone to your computer. And then you choose your sync options in iTunes or Finder, whether you want to sync your entire music library or just specific playlists or artists.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's a little more hands-on than the iCloud Music Library method, but you have more control over what gets synced.
Exactly. You're in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
But here's a really important thing to remember with this method. You have to add your MP3s to your iTunes library before you can sync them to your iPhone.
Oh, interesting. So you can't just drag and drop them directly onto your iPhone, like in the YouTube video?
Nope. With this method, you're essentially copying the files directly onto your iPhone. It's like creating a local copy of your music library on your device.
Got it. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it's kind of like the difference between, I don't know, saving a file to your computer versus saving it to the cloud, One is local, the other is remote.
Perfect analogy. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. And there are pros and cons to each approach.
Right. So with this direct transfer method, what about like storage limitations? iPhones don't have unlimited space, and music libraries can get pretty big. What if you run out of room?
That's a great question. You definitely need to be mindful of storage space, especially if you have a massive MP3 library. You might have to get a little creative, like syncing only your favorite playlists or albums, or even upgrading your iPhone storage capacity.
Good point.
Yeah.
And while we're on the topic of potential issues, that forum discussion we found gets into some pretty interesting territory regarding security.
Ah, yeah. They were discussing things like iOS sandboxing and data protection, basically, how Apple has designed iOS to be very secure. One of the things they were talking about is how each app on your iPhone basically has its own little protected area, and they can't access each other's data without permission.
Oh, that makes me feel better. It would be pretty scary if, like, a random music app could access my banking info.
Yeah, that's definitely not something you want to worry about. Apple takes security very seriously. But, all this talk about iPhones and Apple Music, I'm curious. What about Android users? Can they get in on this MP3 action too?
Oh, yeah. They can definitely get those MP3s onto their devices.
Hmm.
But there's a little twist.
Oh, a plot twist. I love a good plot twist.
Well, it turns out that Apple Music on Android doesn't actually play local files. You have to use a different app for that.
Wait, what? Seriously? You can have Apple Music on Android, but you can't play your own MP3s through it.
That's what our article says, yeah. You have
Yeah.
to use a separate app for that. They mention one called PowerAmp as an example.
Interesting. So basically, if you want to use Apple Music on Android, you got to play by Apple's rules.
That's one way to put it, yeah. It kind of highlights the whole walled garden aspect of Apple's ecosystem, you know?
Yeah.
They want you to stay within their world. It makes sense from a business perspective, I guess, but it's still a little frustrating for Android users who might want more flexibility.
Absolutely. And, PowerAmp is just one example. There are tons of great music player apps for Android. So if you're an Android user, don't feel limited. There are plenty of options out there. You just might have to do a little digging to find the one that's perfect for you.
So much digging. But, speaking of digging and getting into the weeds, we also have that Reddit thread that, well, let's just say it sparked some interesting debate.
Ah, yes, the Reddit thread.
Ah,
Always a source of lively discussion.
always. So the big question in the thread was, can you upload your local files to Apple Music like you can with Spotify? And let me tell you, the answers were all over the place.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. People were getting pretty heated about it, too.
Super heated. Some were saying yes, some were saying no, some were saying you need this thing called iTunes Match. It was a lot to process.
It's definitely more complicated than it seems on the surface.
And then, to make things even more confusing, there was that one user who talked about how they accidentally uploaded their daughter's music to Apple Music. Apparently, it was like her original songs, and suddenly they were available for anyone to stream.
Yeah, that was a pretty wild story.
Wild. So now I'm officially confused. Can you upload local files to Apple Music or not? And if you can, how do you avoid accidentally sharing your daughter's unreleased masterpieces with the entire world?
Okay, well, first things first, let's unpack this whole uploading situation. See, the thing about Apple Music is that it's designed to work seamlessly with your existing Apple Music library. So if you have songs that are already in the Apple Music catalog, it's not really about uploading them, it's more about matching them.
Matching. So like Apple Music checks to see if it already has the song, and if it does, it just adds it to your library.
Exactly. It's like saying, hey, I already have this song, so I'm just going to link to your copy.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about songs that aren't in the Apple Music catalog? Like, say, my friend's band's demo that they recorded in their basement.
Ah, now that's where things get a little more interesting. If Apple Music can't find a match for your song, then yes, it will actually upload your file to your iCloud music library.
So that's how that Reddit user accidentally shared their daughter's music. Apple Music couldn't find a match, so it just uploaded the whole thing.
Most likely, yeah. Which brings us to iTunes Match, that mysterious feature that kept popping up in the Reddit thread.
Yeah, iTunes Match. What exactly is that, and how does it fit into all of this?
Okay, so iTunes Match is kind of like a superpower for your music library. It's a separate subscription from Apple Music, and it essentially scans your entire music library, including those MP3s you've ripped from CDs or downloaded from who knows where,
Yeah.
and tries to find matches for them in the Apple Music catalog.
So it's like having Apple Music double-check your entire library to see if it can find better versions of what you already have.
Exactly. And if it finds a match, it basically upgrades your local file to the high-quality Apple Music version. So you get to keep listening to your music, but you're now streaming it from the cloud with better quality.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So it's like a win-win. But what if iTunes Match can't find a match for one of your songs?
Well, in that case, it uploads your actual file to your iCloud music library.
Yeah.
So now even those rare gems or unreleased tracks are accessible on all your devices.
So that's how you can have like a super personalized Apple Music library. It's a mix of songs from the Apple Music catalog and your own unique files that you've uploaded.
Exactly. And that's where iTunes Match really shines. It bridges the gap between your personal music collection and the vast world of streaming. It's like having the best of both worlds.
It's starting to sound like iTunes Match is the key to unlocking the full potential of Apple Music, especially if you're someone who has a large MP3 collection.
Absolutely. It's a game changer. But I think we've thrown a lot of information at everyone today. Maybe it's time to take a quick break and let it all sink in.
Good idea. We'll be back in a bit to dive even deeper into managing your MP3 library on your iPhone. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So before the break, we were talking about iTunes Match and how it's like this kind of secret weapon for anyone who wants to like really merge their personal MP3 collection with the power of Apple Music.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it, like all the stuff it does behind the scenes.
Totally. Like, remember how we were saying that if iTunes Match finds a match for one of your MP3s in the Apple Music catalog, it'll automatically give you the higher quality version for streaming?
Yep. So even if you rip that CD like 10 years ago and the quality isn't great, iTunes Match will hook you up with the best possible version.
That's so cool. It's like getting a free audio upgrade.
Exactly. But what I was thinking about was, what happens if you have like a live version of a song or a remix, something that probably isn't in the Apple Music catalog?
Oh, good point. Like, what if I have a bootleg recording of my favorite band from like a tiny club back in the day?
Well, in that case, iTunes Match is smart enough to realize it doesn't have a match. So instead of trying to force a fit, it'll upload your unique file to your iCloud music library.
Oh, wow. So you don't lose those special tracks that are like part of your own personal music history.
Exactly. You get to keep all those gems,
Yeah.
and now they're accessible on all your devices, just like the rest of your Apple music library.
So it really is the best of both worlds, right? Like you get the convenience and massive selection of Apple Music, but you also get to hold on to those unique tracks that are like part of your musical DNA.
I love that musical DNA. That's a perfect way to put it.
But okay, real talk for a second. All the stuff about high quality audio and streaming is great and all, but what about those times when you're like totally off the grid, no Wi-Fi, no cell service? Can you still listen to your music?
Absolutely. That's one of the big advantages of actually having your music locally stored on your iPhone. Whether you put it there through a direct transfer or iTunes Match uploaded it, you can listen offline anytime you want.
That's a huge relief. Because let's be real, there are times when you're like on a plane or hiking in the woods or whatever, and you just want to listen to your music without having to worry about a good internet connection.
Exactly. You're not at the mercy of the Wi-Fi gods. Remember that iPhone MP3 library source we had? They had some really good advice about like downloading playlists specifically for offline listening.
Oh, yeah. That's a smart move, especially if you know you're going to be without internet for a while. Download all your faves and you're good to go.
Exactly. Preparation is key. But speaking of organizing your music and making sure you have what you need, one of the things that really stood out to me in that source was the whole idea of smart playlists.
Smart playlists, yeah. I've always been a little intimidated by those. They sound like really complicated.
They sound way more complicated than they actually are. They're actually super helpful once you get the hang of them.
Okay, so break it down for me. What makes a smart playlist so...
Well, so with a regular playlist, you're manually choosing each song, right? Like one by one. But with a smart playlist, you set up these rules, and it automatically adds songs based on those rules.
Whoa, so it's like it does the work for you.
Exactly. So for example, you could create a smart playlist for your workouts and tell it to only include songs that have a certain BPM, to keep you pumped up.
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm always struggling to find the right tempo for my workouts.
Right. Or you could have a smart playlist that includes all songs from a specific genre or released in a certain year. The possibilities are endless.
It's like having a personal DJ in your pocket, always curating the perfect playlist for you.
I like that, a personal DJ. And the best part is, smart playlists update automatically. So if you add new music to your library that fits the rules you set, it'll get added to the playlist without you having to lift a finger.
That is so cool. I got to start using smart playlists. It's like taking music organization to a whole new level.
Totally. But, while we're on the topic of making your music library your own, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, metadata editing.
Oh yeah, metadata. That's where you can get really granular, like adding album art, fixing typos and song titles, stuff like that.
Exactly. It might seem like a small thing, but it can make a huge difference in how you experience your music library.
For sure. It's like you want your music library to be as polished and accurate as possible, right? Just like you'd want your physical record collection to be all organized and pristine.
I love that analogy. It's about taking pride in your music collection, whether it's physical or digital.
Totally. But I remember our iPhone MP3 library source also mentioned that metadata is actually really important for Apple Music integration, too.
Oh yeah, big time. Remember how we were saying that Apple Music uses tagging to understand your music? Well, when you take the time to edit your metadata, you're actually helping Apple Music do its job better.
So it's like if I have a song title that's misspelled or I'm missing the album art, Apple Music might not be able to categorize it correctly or recommend it to me at the right time.
Exactly. It's all
Yeah,
connected. So by cleaning up your metadata, you're not just making your library look nicer, you're also ensuring that Apple Music can work its magic more effectively.
that's awesome. So like if I spend a little time making sure everything is tagged correctly, Apple Music will reward me with better recommendations and a more personalized listening experience.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a win-win. But, speaking of ways to customize your listening experience, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on from that source. Equalizer settings.
Oh, yeah, equalizers. I remember those from back in the day when I used to mess around with the sound settings on my old stereo system. But is that stuff still relevant? Don't modern headphones and speakers already, do a pretty good job of making music sound good?
They do, yeah. But equalizers can still make a big difference, especially if you're picky about your sound quality or if you're listening on, older equipment.
So it's like if you really want to fine-tune the sound to your liking, an equalizer can give you that extra level of control.
Exactly. Like, some people love to really crank up the bass, while others prefer a more balanced sound. Equalizers let you tweak the different frequency ranges to get the sound that's perfect for you and for what you're listening to.
So it's not just about making things louder, it's about shaping the sound.
Exactly. It's about making the music sound the way you want it to sound. And the good news is most music players these days, including Apple Music, have built-in equalizers that are really easy to use.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm definitely gonna have to play around with those. It's like having a mini recording studio in your pocket.
Right. And some music players even have presets for different genres of music, like
Hmm.
rock or classical or jazz. So you can just choose the preset that fits what you're listening to, and
Mhm.
it'll automatically adjust the sound.
That's so cool. I love having options. But okay, before we go totally down the rabbit hole of audio customization, I want to just circle back to something we talked about earlier, which is the whole idea of making your MP3 collection truly your own.
Oh yeah, making it personal.
Exactly. One of the things I've always loved about having my own MP3 collection is the ability to create custom album art.
Huh.
If I have a bunch of random songs that I've thrown together into a playlist, I can make my own cover art for it.
That's awesome. That's a fun way to add a visual element to your music library. It's like you're creating your own little mixtape, but in a digital way.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can just use a photo from your phone or find something cool online. It's just a nice way to make it feel more personalized.
Totally. And it's a reminder that your music library is more than just a collection of files. It's a reflection of you, your taste, your memories. It should be something you enjoy looking at as much as you enjoy listening to.
I love that. It's like your music library is a work of art in itself.
Exactly. But, we've covered a lot of ground in this segment. Maybe we should take a little breather and come back to talk about Apple Music Connect and how you can use it to, connect with your favorite artists and discover new music.
Sounds good to me. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back with more deep dive goodness. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of MP3s on your iPhone. It's been quite a journey so far. Before the break, we were talking about all the cool ways you can personalize your music library, like tweaking those equalizer settings or creating custom album art. It's amazing how much control we have over our music experience these days.
It really is. And speaking of control, something that really stood out to me from our research is the whole idea of digital music ownership versus streaming. Is it better to actually own your music files, or is it better to just rely on a streaming service?
Oh, that's a big question. And I feel like there's no easy answer.
Totally. It's a complex issue with a lot of different factors to consider. But I think it's something worth thinking about, especially in the context of all these different methods we've been discussing for getting your MP3s onto your iPhone.
Right. With direct transfer, You're literally putting those MP3 files onto your device. You own them. You can listen to them offline. You can back them up. You can do whatever you want with them.
Exactly. And that's a big appeal for a lot of people. They like the idea of having their music collection under their control, not relying on a streaming service.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, streaming services like Apple Music offer incredible convenience. You have access to like millions of songs all at your fingertips.
It's true. I mean, I love having a huge library of music to choose from. And with streaming, you can discover new music so easily just based on your listening history or recommendations.
Totally. And let's not forget about the whole social aspect of streaming services. You can share playlists with friends, see what other people are listening to. It can be a really fun way to connect with other music lovers.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of like a whole community. But going back to the ownership thing, I think there's something to be said for having those special tracks that you know you'll always have access to no matter what. Like maybe it's a rare recording or a song that has a lot of sentimental value for you.
Oh, absolutely. I have a bunch of old concert recordings and demo tracks from my favorite bands, stuff that you'll never find on a streaming service.
Hmm.
And those are priceless to me.
I totally get it. It's like those are part of your personal music history. And sometimes you just want to know that those songs are there for you no matter what happens with the internet or with streaming services or whatever.
Right. And that's why I think it's cool that with Apple Music, you kind of have the best of both worlds. You can have that massive streaming library, but you can also integrate your own personal MP3 collection with iTunes Match or just by syncing directly.
Yeah, you get the convenience and the massive selection, and you get to keep your own special collection. It's a pretty sweet setup.
For sure. So I guess what we're saying is there's no right or wrong answer to the ownership versus streaming question. It's all about what works best for you, your listening habits, and your priorities.
Exactly. And I think that's a great takeaway from our deep dive today. There are so many different ways to approach this whole MP3 on your iPhone thing. There are different methods, different tools, different philosophies, but the key is to find what works best for you.
And to have fun with it. Music is supposed to be enjoyable, so don't get too caught up in the technical details. Experiment, explore, and find what brings you the most joy.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the basics of syncing to the complexities of iTunes Match and iCloud Music Library. We talked about organizing your library, personalizing your listening experience, and even touched on the philosophical questions of music ownership and streaming.
It's been quite a journey, and hopefully you've learned a few new things along the way. Maybe you're inspired to finally organize that messy MP3 collection, or dive into the world of smart playlists, or explore some of the more advanced features of Apple Music.
And hey, if you have any tips or trips that you've discovered along the way, share them in the comments. We're always looking for new ways to make the most of our music experience.
Absolutely. Let's keep the conversation going. And until next time, happy listening.
Happy listening, everyone.